Okay, and we are live. So, hey everyone that's watching. I have with me today Rick Hoeg from Hoeg Law. For anyone that doesn't know him, he is another lawyer on YouTube. Focuses most of his content on video gaming, but not all of it. Video gaming and the law, the intersection of the two. I came across his channel maybe about a year-ish ago, probably around the time that The Last of Us Part 2 came out. I think it was the first time I saw your channel.
That was a long series. I did a long series on that. Yeah.
I think it was your post-mortem on it.
Okay.
Love your channel, love your stuff. You are incredibly prolific. That's like one of the biggest things to say, is because I'm always stunned by the way that you're able to just, anytime something happens, you're able to respond so quickly, and you get so much content out so quickly, and so in such a detailed sort of way. So I'm always
about that sometimes.
Oh yeah, no, but I'm always just so impressed by how you're able to do it. I'm like, I need to figure out how to do better, how to be more like Hoeg.
I think you're doing great. I think if I've been watching your numbers, you've grown a lot. I think it's awesome, and you've been appearing on all sorts of places. So I think when I first when we first did our first show together, it was you tiny.
Yeah,
and so I think it's awesome. But no, I very much appreciate that. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I do. I see interesting stuff, and I do a video either before my work day, kind of put one together, or in some days I have done videos between closing calls. It's trying to fit it into your work day, and that's one of the first things I tried to do was get into a place where, as you know, this practice is busy. It's hard to know when the next client email or call is going to come, so you have to find a way to get the process going while you handle everything else. So it's very nice of you to say. I try to get one out if something interesting happens, and a lot of people now are asking for specific stuff, and I always feel bad when I have to say no, which is more and more often now.
Yeah. So I guess for anyone that isn't as familiar with your channel and with your stuff, tell us a little bit about your channel and how you started it. Sort of a little bit of an introduction. So here's your YouTube channel there.
YouTube channel. 40,000, almost 40,000. That's cool.
Yeah.
The primary show that I do is Virtual Legality, which is a show which, as you said, I think probably 80%, maybe a little bit more, does business and law related to video games. The premise of the channel was essentially to take transactional law, legal questions, things that I knew, that I thought were not getting misreported, but not with the nuance that probably they deserved. The very first episode of Virtual Legality is about whether or not you can go ask for a refund of Fallout 76 back in 2018. And so it was, all right, let's read the terms and conditions. Let's see what they did. And then that grew into, we've got kind of consistent things that pop up again and again and again. Software is licensed and not sold. What does that mean? How do the terms interact with everything else? When can you ask for a refund? What does the FTC do? And it just kind of spirals into these kind of things. And then you see, like, there's a picture of Biden up there when they're talking about 230, and when you've got the things that relate to technology, and it just kind of grew. And occasionally I do things still like postmortems of Loki. But the idea was in 2018, I had a couple of deals, as happens sometimes at the end of quarters, that wanted to push to the next quarter. And when you've kind of allotted time to handle two simultaneous deals, they both go away. You say, all right, let's do some marketing. Let's do some business development. Let's see what's going on. And I had a few clients that were on YouTube at the time and said, I want to know what they're seeing, because they're asking me questions about things that I don't know. I want to get that algorithm. So I want to understand what's going on at YouTube. And I said, hey, I'm going to take some of the questions and answers that I had done for a podcast called Easy Allies that I had helped sponsor, that seemed to go pretty well, where they were asking me legal questions about, is Microsoft going to buy every company on the planet, and how do mergers work, and that kind of thing. I said, let's see if we can make a channel out of it. My wife said, nobody's going to watch that. I said, yeah, all right. We went from there. And so 2018, we did little things, Fallout 76. The big growth for the channel was actually covering COPPA, when YouTube started imposing the COPPA just for kids, not for kids rules. I think that's at the end of 2019, I want to say. I'd have to look at the timing there. But then that kind of developed into talking about anything and everything that is remotely tangentially related to turning on a computer, give or take. So we talk about those things. We talk about pop culture. I'm going to have a video that goes up today about the Black Widow lawsuit. But it's been a great deal of fun. It's been very insightful in terms of what this big section of entrepreneurs, who I really love. You know, a lot of YouTubers are people that are just going out there, seeing if they can make a living, seeing if they can make business contacts, network, whatever it is that they're doing, just talking about what they're passionate about and what they love. And that's always been so cool to me. That's why I do this. I was in big law for better part of a decade and a half. And I left because I love the energy of entrepreneurs and people selling it all, mortgaging the house to go for their dream and that kind of thing. And that's what I like to help with. And YouTube, social media in general, the next generation after me, people that are just, let's go see if we can make something happen with a $80 microphone and a camera, that I love. And so that kind of comes across in the fact that I do it, obviously, but it was never my intent to really be a YouTuber as much as it turned out that way. Hey, it's Nate the lawyer. See, I subscribe to that.
Yeah. So I
YouTube
just had...
law. Oh, I got on civil law here too.
Yeah.
The YouTube lawyers are here.
Yes.
So no, it's that virtual legality's been that. And when it's really working, it's really working. And certainly when something like the state of California sues Activision Blizzard for institutional harassment and discrimination, whatever black box YouTube uses, it knows to like me on that kind of stuff. So that works out. Yeah. And hopefully we get more and better information out there. That's the whole idea.
Yeah. And one thing that I love about what you do with a lot of these videos is, I mean, when you get very interested in a particular topic, I mean, you go all out. I mean, you create a whole playlist, like for the Epic versus Apple and Google.
51.
You know, that whole saga. I mean, that's a whole library on its own. That's like a whole channel.
That's 51 videos right now, and we're still waiting on that opinion, Judge. You promised us before August 4th, I think. We're coming up on
time's running out. Time's running out. You have to round out the whole playlist, right? Although realistically, there's probably going to be an appeal.
I know that one's going to have to be an hour and a half or 2 hours, and I have no idea what day it's going to hit. So it's like, all right, we'll try to do that. But yeah, no, it's very nice of you to say. Yeah, the playlist thing came up because that wasn't what I was doing. If you go back really far in time, I was doing like numbering them and saying -2, -3 and it wasn't really working so well. And I wasn't able to update when things were changing. So you have videos where it's like, here's how things are. And then how do I address that when it's somewhat small?
Yeah.
But I want to hit that. And so the playlist came when, thankfully Epic, Apple, Activision Blizzard, they all have corporate messaging and CEOs with personality and ill-advised statements. So you always have topics to discuss.
And that's something that I noticed that you like to cover a lot also is a lot of corporate messaging.
Yes.
Because that's the kind of law that you practice, right? Is a corporate, a lot of like business law, corporate law.
I'm a corporate lawyer. I started doing mergers and acquisitions, venture capital, entrepreneurship, starting up, working with those startups. And then as part of that, anytime you're going to have that much contact with businesses, whether it's hiring, firing, funding, contracts, you're going to get into situations where you're helping them crisis manage, right? So it's like, people have asked me this in comments, like, well, you're not PR, you're not marketing. It's like, no, legal's a part of that conversation. Right. And what you start to get is an understanding, both from a respect of legal, don't make guarantees, don't make promises, negative or affirmative, that kind of thing that we're used to.
Don't make any admissions.
Don't make admissions, try to avoid that. But you also get, because you're interacting in that field so much and you're dealing with those crisis communications, know your audience, figure out who you're trying to talk to. What are you trying to accomplish? You go back and you look at some of the stuff we've seen this week and you say, what was the goal? What did you think you were doing with this? And you can just start to analyze that. And I think that's pretty useful on YouTube because you get so much of this now and everybody says, it's artificial. It's like, it might be. But you can still try to see what they were trying to accomplish and whether they succeeded or failed. And in video gaming, either because it's a young industry, because it's founder-led very often, there's any number of reasons you could put on it. In video gaming, it's so idiosyncratic that there's so many, what I describe as foot faults usually, that aren't apocalyptic, but just kind of, that's not going to work. And then a day later, it doesn't work. And we do another video. And it didn't work. Yeah. And you can see, you get those fun interactions because a lot of other industries they got this down. right? They know how to say something milquetoast. They know how to not
Yeah.
make this worse. Activision Blizzard did nothing but make this worse for a week.
Right. I was just about to say, other industries, I guess you could say like blue chip companies, they would maybe know to maybe take a beat before they actually make a public statement. Don't have several executives making several different statements.
It's 4 statements in 4 days, I think. It's no good.
Yeah. So let's. I mean, on that, let's turn to the lawsuit itself. I mean, well, I guess first kind of go over the complaint and some of the allegations and whatnot, and then we'll talk a lot about the. I'd love to save a lot of time for the corporate messaging and all that kind of stuff because I know you talk about that a lot.
Yeah. If I could give one disclaimer, you might have heard in my videos.
Yes.
Check them out already, which is. Obviously, standard legal disclaimers. Those are part of this channel, not legal advice. I do. There's a Hoeg that works at an Activision company that you might have heard on my channel.
Yes.
And I have specifically not talked to him, not asked his opinion, not run these by him, not gone through anything with him. But I like to give that disclaimer. Different people are going to feel different things about that, whether I'm being too mean to Activision or too nice. Honestly, it's represented in both directions in the comments to my videos. But I do like to get that out there because I want people to evaluate that for themselves. So I do. There's a Hoeg working at an Activision company who undoubtedly has thoughts on all of this, but that I have not asked him because I don't think that's fair to put him in that position.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I think you're really great at putting those disclaimers out there in your videos. Anytime there's a possibility of some sort of a bias or anything.
I try. I think I missed one in the Blizzard series, but I try.
Yeah. So, but that's so great for, for full, accountability and, just transparency for the viewer, which I think is kind of rare these days, generally speaking, when it comes to the media, at large, I guess. But so it's great that you definitely do that. So with the disclaimer aside, I mean, the complaint, I know that there's definitely some strengths and some weaknesses to this complaint. And one of the things, actually, I guess even before getting into that is, you talk about it, in your videos, and I talked about it in my video on the Activision Blizzard lawsuit too. And one of the things that's really important especially in a case like this where emotions run hot very quickly is maintaining that sense of objectivity. I know you've talked about that quite a bit too. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all.
No, I mean, I think it's always important. We're going to be talking about a lawsuit that's sensitive, that's sensitive to a lot of people and is going to hit on a lot of important things from both directions. And, we're going to do it lawyer style. And so we're going to talk about what's in the complaint, how it's presented, the strategies involved, maybe where people reach too far, maybe where the response goes too far, all the things that we think about as lawyers. That isn't intended to discount the real problems that people are having, the stories that are coming out. And, the one thing I would say, the very first thing I tweeted about this when my phone went nuts, it was like Thursday night last week, is these are serious matters deserving of the seriousness with which they're being treated by the state of California. And we can disagree, and I disagree with certain things that California did in that document. And that doesn't mean that the investigation is worthless, that Activision Blizzard is in the clear, all this other stuff. It means that this is the way I look at things and hopefully can present that informationally on YouTube and elsewhere. But it is important to have the conversation and to acknowledge that it certainly seems like, regardless of whether you think Activision Blizzard systematically did things, as California asserts, clearly some people had instances and stories that harmed them, and that's worthy of consideration as part of the conversation. So what you will get in a conversation like this might, in isolation, sound a little bit more cold than it really is. It's just that the empathy and the emotionality I try to separate from actually looking at what's claimed and how the law works in that regard. Right.
And I think there's definitely a place for having the warmer side, the more empathetic side. There's definitely a place for that. But I think that when we are analyzing the claims, just like with any other lawsuit, if there are very sensitive allegations that are made, or maybe not so sensitive allegations that are made, it's either way, the whole point of the lawsuit is to figure out where the truth falls, where the evidence falls. And so the only way to do that is by looking at all of the allegations rigorously and trying to
Do you
pinpoint the
show the
weak
elements?
points.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So I mean, for anyone that hasn't seen any content yet on this lawsuit, basically the DFEH, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, they filed this lawsuit against Activision Blizzard, of course, alleging all kinds of allegations of employment discrimination, harassment, retaliation on the basis of sex. So basically saying that women are discriminated against, in terms of compensation, termination, promotion. They're being harassed at work because of, there's all kinds of cube crawls and
yes, a term that I didn't know before last week. Yes.
Yeah. I had no idea about this term either, but as soon as I read it, I was like, oh, I can picture that. So.
Yes, unfortunately, I can picture that too.
Yes. Yeah. True. So let's talk about some of the strengths and then some of the weaknesses of the complaint. So what were some of the strengths that you saw in the complaint?
Sure. I mean, the thing that jumped out at me first when I read through this and I was looking at some reporting just to find where exactly the link was. I always appreciate it when some reporter puts the actual complaint somewhere. That's always helpful.
Oh, yeah.
But what was getting reported on was what I describe as the lascivious allegations. There's 2 pages of the stuff that's headline news, and that's probably stuff that your viewers have already heard about. We'll get to it. But one of the things that I noted immediately was that you kind of put an introduction in a lawsuit in the order that you want the people to be thinking about it. And California started with discrimination. And the distinction between discrimination and harassment is essentially discrimination is wrongful choices, but in things that you're legally allowed to do. Hiring, firing, promotion, termination. You have to do that to run a company, and then it's doing it illegally, doing it to keep down women, any other of the protected classes, either in California or federally, that kind of thing. And then harassment is pretty self-explanatory, but that's why you get me constantly saying it's a lawsuit about discrimination and harassment and not just kind of skipping ahead. Because what the state of California did was what they really want to hit is an equal pay complaint. And that's the very first paragraph they hit. That's the big footnotes they put at the top of their lawsuit is they want to say that Activision Blizzard is willfully, intentionally, and maliciously keeping women's pay down. And that's what the bulk of the document is about. The bulk of the document is about stories and anecdotes and data points that relate to not getting promoted against male counterparts, not getting paid enough. And then the harassment kind of comes in as the coup de grace for that. If you're reading that introduction, you have all that discrimination stuff and the equal pay, and then you get a set of paragraphs that essentially say, well, and there's a lot of harassment, and so it should come as no surprise that a company that's willing to harass women is willing to discriminate against them. It's really all funneling back into the payment concept because that's where the real action lives. In terms of harassment, is probably not every woman equally. It's probably not every circumstance. The discrimination, if they can prove that Activision Blizzard is deliberately discriminating on all managerial decisions about women, that's where you've got huge amounts of restitution and punitive damages and everything else. So you built this thing to feed into that. And if you're California and you're playing the PR game, you're wise because you put in this harassment stuff that maybe is a little bit tougher to show as systematic with what you actually put in the complaint. We've obviously seen the stories, and those kind of come into the entire narrative of what's happening, but not in the document itself. So you've got only a couple of allegations. You know those are going to get reported on. They feed back in. Nobody really talks about discrimination because there's not a lot to report on. This is a data fight between Activision Blizzard and California. And so in my opinion, the discrimination part, which is the largest part of the document, is the hardest part to prove. Because in working with big companies, Activision Blizzard's a publicly traded company. And they've been that way for a long time. They appear to have all the policies and procedures necessary for everything in terms of harassment and everything else. Whether or not they did those, that's another question. But you would assume that they have been following best practices for hiring and firing and termination and all that for a long, long time. Best practices being primarily documenting things, making sure you have a reason why you promoted X over Y, why you did this with the hiring. And it would surprise the heck out of me if Activision Blizzard doesn't have reams and reams and reams of paperwork establishing why this happened and not this. And the allegations, every single one of them, if you want to read them on Activision Blizzard as a saint, you can generally make the story work for, well, there's probably a reason that happened. We don't know this because it's the kind of thing you find out in a trial.
Yes.
So
or at least through the discovery process.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, when both sides are exchanging evidence with one another, they're doing depositions, they're bringing in all of these supervisors that hired or fired or failed to promote or whatever, that made all of these decisions.
They're finding emails.
They're going through the employees, employee file, saying, this was their evaluation. These are the marks where they missed the mark, or maybe they hit it and they did great, and they were actually entitled to more pay than they actually received in comparison to other people. But yeah, that was one thing that I noticed too, is that this is a kind of a strange case, because it reads like a class action complaint.
It does. They do it that way deliberately. Yes.
But it's not exactly right, because they are a state agency of the state of California. They're not actually legally required to lay out all of the elements of a class action that a normal case would require.
No, they get to assert it. I was looking when I was this didn't make its way into one of my videos, but there's a couple of articles about, I think it was Disney trying to fight DFEH doing this to them earlier, and claiming that they could represent the class of aggrieved people on the recording of one of their television shows. And I apologize, I can't remember which one it was. And the court actually kicked it out and said, no, they get to just assert an aggrieved class, and then you can fight it later on as we get further. You can't just, they ask for summary dismissal. It's like, there's not a class here. They can't possibly be the same for the normal reasons why you would fight a class. They don't have the same legal standing.
Yeah.
And the court said, no, the statute's pretty clear. They can just say this right now, and then you can fight it later. And so California, and this is one of the things I also try to communicate, is it's a weird state insofar as they have a lot of things in their statute and a lot of things that they're allowed to do and that they've authorized. They've given the power to their agencies to do that you won't see mirrors of in other states. Ordinarily, something like this here in Michigan, say, would generally be an attorney general's action. It might be something like one of the labor departments, but it would be an attorney general's action, and it would be part of a bigger investigation. Here, they've actually empowered their Fair Employment and Housing Group to do that investigation and to litigate. And so California is an aggressive state for this. Doesn't make it wrong, but they are more aggressive than the other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I was a plaintiff's attorney in an employment firm that all of our clients were employees. So I represented clients in all kinds of cases, a lot like this one. Not on this size level. Yeah, exactly. No, it was always a single plaintiff in my cases, but it's very employee friendly. It made my job a bit easier in a lot of these cases. But that's actually one of the things, is that, in my experience, I never had a discrimination or a harassment case where I had more than one plaintiff, because they're so fact dependent.
They really are. And that's another thing I tried to communicate, is you go through these data points, and it's so tough to get to the actual allegation is that Activision Blizzard itself is discriminating and harassing, not the individual supervisor, not the manager. The company itself is, with these data points. And you go, well, you picked the toughest road here, and it's the most lucrative. It's where you get the most punishment, and I get it. But you do that, you say that you're going to establish they did it intentionally. You start to say, wow, okay, that's hard, because all we have are these stories, and every single story is fact dependent. Every single story, you give Activision the opportunity to say, well, yes, you make a good case, California. This person did make more revenue because they were managing more marketing campaigns, which is one of their examples, and this male maybe did not. However, we can show that this male made double the money on a single campaign for any of this other person. You get, and that's not to say that that's the case, but it's when you have to go through every single one of them, because you're trying to establish that systematically they were deliberately keeping women's pay and promotions and hiring down. It's a tough thing to do if the company is documenting anything and following any kind of legal recourse.
Yeah, and a company of this size is probably I would assume is going to be documenting pretty much everything, just so that they can keep track of everything.
They weren't, right?
Yeah. It's when you get to that size, it's everything has to be recorded, or else they'll quickly lose track of everything. So, but yeah, the fact that they have chosen to take this route, it definitely makes it much more difficult, because, as you said, each of these little vignettes that they bring up in the complaint is going to have to be litigated. Activision Blizzard is going to need an opportunity to look at each one of those and say, well, there was reason X, Y, Z as to why this decision was made. And so, and that is something that, at first it looks like and I apologize also, I'm going to interrupt really quick. I apologize if you hear a dog whining right now. I know I can hear her. So I think viewers the mic tends to pick her up pretty quickly. So if you hear a dog whining, that's the dog that's crated. She wants to be with us. I have 2 cats in here right now. So you may see one of them at least, but anyway, so that aside. What was I saying? I totally lost my train of thought. What was I saying? I was totally in the mid thought train. What were we just saying?
Well, I mean, I think we were just talking about the complaint in general, the discrimination complaint specifically. I don't know where you were going with yours, unfortunately. I would absolutely help if I could.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. But there are other issues here with the complaint, having to do with, I know that you talked about in your video, one of your many videos on the subject. Another part is that they rely very heavily on comparing the women's experiences, the female employees' experiences with their male counterparts.
Male counterparts is the language doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? So,
right.
I mean, the big key to an equal pay or discrimination case in general is, are we talking about the same thing? And this is one of those areas where I rarely say something is specifically a mistake. I try to couch, as a lawyer does, with maybe not the direction I would have gone, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think this is one of the few areas where I say, I think California screwed that up, because one of the very first things they do in their introduction is they talk about that equal pay concept. And they say Activision itself has admitted that it pays women less than men. And then it puts up a footnote that's of the chief suite, the C-level suite of executive officer, operating officer, financial officer, people officer, legal officer. And they're trying to establish that the people officer isn't making as much money as everybody else. And that's a woman. It's a woman facing role. And they don't do the same jobs. The chief people officer, the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer. You could think Bobby Kotick is wildly overpaid. I'm not going to tell anybody they're wrong. It doesn't make the chief executive officer and the chief people officer substantially similar roles. Chief people officer is a tough job. I wouldn't want it. But the fact that they make $4 million and not $194 million isn't indicative on its face of an equal pay complaint. And I'm not saying California scuttled the ship with that kind of thing. It's a rhetorical device in their introduction. They're trying to show something. It's just bad, because when you start to say California is trying to show, this is counterparts, they're treating women poorly, and you get down to when they're just using counterparts generically and it doesn't have any footnote or evidence, you start to say, well, what do you mean by counterpart, California? Like, do you mean that they started at the same time? Because lead art director is different than art director, and coder is different than art, and video games take a wild amount of disciplines at a number of different seniority levels.
Yes.
And you have to do your homework for counterparts. And I can't tell whether you're now eliding these kinds of things because you blew it for me on the introduction. And that's the kind of thing where I say, yeah, you probably could. Without that paragraph, you're probably better, because I'm not thinking those thoughts. I'm assuming you're going through the effort of establishing what substantially similar work is. And now I go, I don't know. I don't know that I trust you on this. And so that will have to be litigated on all those.
Yeah. Things. I mean, and that's another thing too, is that, when you are putting together a complaint, there's always the primacy and latency, right? You want to start with your strongest argument, finish with your strongest argument, because everything that's in the middle is usually going to be forgotten. Yeah. So the fact that they started with this idea that women are paid less than men,
yes.
They're doing the same work and they're getting paid less for it. But the example that they use is at the corporate executive level. I think that's
always
not
a bad choice.
That's not the story. Yeah, because that is a very different way of hiring entirely than the people in the mailroom, because those in the mailroom are, it's you have a very simple job that you do every single day. It's the same thing over and over again, and you get paid on an hourly basis, and that's it. Right. It's a very simple.
Yeah.
Exactly. But when it comes to the executive level, you've got people that you're looking at, not just their experience and the other corporations that they've been working for and their education, but you're also looking at the overall executive market too. I mean, that's one of the arguments for why Bobby Kotick makes as much as he does as the CEO, is because other CEOs at other big corporations are also making a lot of money. And so for him, his calculus is, how much am I going to be getting paid here versus at Coca-Cola or GM or one of these other really big corporations.
That's right.
So so I definitely agree that I think that was a particular weak point, and the fact that they didn't have any other
page. Yeah, or second page, very early.
Yeah, and there's no other real concrete reference or an example of other women that are being paid less for doing the same.
Yeah, no,
work.
It's all stories. No, and then they allied some of that stuff as well with, they don't make a hiring charge, which is interesting. They just use reference to hiring as part of their equal pay complaint. So in a couple of places they say that Activision assigned women to lesser roles, and it's like, that's a weirdly passive way of saying you offered a role and then you hired a woman for that role. I generally speaking, you're taking them in as a job. They're applying for a job and you're giving them that job, men and women. So it's I don't know what you're trying to say, California. You have a general job and then you move them to something low. What's trying to be established there? Because that matters. Because if you're coming in at this level job versus this level job, you expect there to be a pay difference. And so they do skip some of the detail, and they do that because it's effective in certain respects. It's certainly effective in reporting, and you get paragraphs that say, well, they've alleged that women make a lot less than men, and I don't doubt that necessarily, especially when you see, I mean, you got Bobby starting with 194, that puts him in the lead by a lot, just from the start. But all of that math is going to be dependent in every instance on substantially similar work, role, tenure, everything else. So there are some harrowing stories in the discrimination side. They're more harrowing on the harassment side.
Right.
But you look at those and I say, not for purposes of defending Activision Blizzard, it's like, I can imagine this story goes this way. And I can imagine it goes worse, that Activision Blizzard is twirling their mustaches and literally you've got them, California. And there's ways to read it both ways. Yeah. But you can't tell from that complaint. And as a lawyer, I look at that complaint and say, okay, we've got a good first piece of evidence. We got a data point to start with. Let's see what Activision says.
Yeah, no, for sure. It'll be really interesting to see what their actual defense is. Before we get to their overall responses, let me get this super chat from Nate the lawyer. Thanks so much, Nate. Big Hoeg Law fan since the Legal Eagle collab and the COPPA video. 33 watching and only 10 likes. Hit the like button. So yeah. If you guys are watching this and you're enjoying it, I mean, it's so funny because I didn't realize until I became a content creator myself just how important that like button is, because it's so simple. You don't even think about it. It really does, because especially for a channel, of my size, it's definitely grown quite a bit in the last year. But I mean, it's still considered a smaller channel for now.
Votes. If you all don't like how much I disliked Loki, give me a down vote. That robot loves those too. Believe me.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing is if you visit Hoeg Law's Rick Hoeg's his Twitter.
People refer to me either way.
Yeah, either way, right? If you visit his Twitter account, he talks a lot about also movies and TV shows and his reviews and that kind of stuff too. And we've had some discussions about some of the latest Marvel releases, and we've agreed in some places, disagreed in a few others. I think I enjoyed Loki a little bit more than you did.
I think I said Loki's my favorite by default. Hey, it's a 6-hour commercial for Phase 4. That's all good.
Yeah, true. So let's get into I guess some of Activision Blizzard's responses to this lawsuit. I mean,
the only question I wanted to have for you before we went into that was whether or not you wanted to hit the harassment half at all.
Oh,
obviously we can watch ourselves with it. I just didn't know whether you wanted to touch on it or not.
Yeah, no, by all means, let's get into it.
Yeah, I mean, so the other half of this document, half is being too strong because it's 3 paragraphs in one count, but the other portion of this document, and by far the one that is reported upon, is the harassment stuff. So there you go. You've got your 3 primary allegations, which is cube crawl, Cosby Suite, and a hotel room incident, whatever that might be. And the hotel room suicide question is the one that Activision Blizzard clearly took the most offense to. It's referenced in like 3 of their responses.
Yeah.
And essentially the state of California alleged that due to harassment, an individual, female employee at Activision Blizzard committed suicide while on a work trip. And one of the things that I pointed out in particular with that paragraph is that, one, it's odd to respond that strongly from a corporate statement standpoint. So I guess we're bringing in some of the statement stuff at the same time. So that is suggestive of Activision really believing that's wrong. That didn't appear to just be posturing. The other thing is that it's hard to imagine the evidence that California has to assert that definitively. Suicides are traditionally one of the toughest things for the law to deal with because you don't usually get enough answers for how that all goes down.
You can't exactly ask the person.
You can't ask the person. So somebody comes in my comments and says, well, could they have a suicide note? I was like, it's possible. It would be really weird in this circumstance. And so what they appear to have said, and they don't even really allege harassment that much. They allege that the subordinate was in a sexual relationship with the supervisor, which, you take that into the lawyer's room and they'll say, oh, please, this is exposure risks. This is a bad idea. But they allege that. They allege that the supervisor brought toys along on the trip. They allege the suicide. And then they have the weird sentence that a lot of people have grappled on that says that an employee has told them that it may have occurred because of an alleged sharing of illicit photography of the person in question at a company party. The weirdness there is that California is very specifically not using alleged, not using may in the entirety of the complaint. In fact, when we talk about the Cosby suite in just a second, it's notable that they name people and they don't use alleged. And it's like, it's pretty dicey for me when you don't have a named defendant when you're in that role. Yeah. But in this case, they get really light on the assertion of the nude photography being shared. It's may and alleged. It's like, so you got one person saying something on like one interview and you don't want to commit to that. Yeah. And so you say, okay, California is clearly presenting as weakest on that. And then Activision goes nuts on them on that particular point. And you say, I'm going to need to know more about that in order to come off one way. And that's the one that I think really emotionally people latch onto a lot. I had a lot of commenters being like, you shouldn't be that analytical on this because somebody died. It's like, hey, it's a tragedy. We're looking at cause and effect now. They're being sued as causing it. Yeah. And we have to look at what that is in this context. And that's no fun for anybody. That's why I try to have all of the statements that I have in my videos to say, look, this is all bad stuff. And we're looking at this from a legal perspective. But that's one that jumped out at me as Activision really thinks that's wrong and unfair. And if it is wrong and unfair, it legitimately is. The state does some not so great stuff here with that, where you say, what evidence do you have linking those two? And then with the Cosby suite stuff, which of course we could talk about, which Kotaku did some good journalisming the past couple of days in finding some stuff. And that one is one where they name a person. They say one of the most egregious examples is this person getting away with all this and getting a slap on the wrist. And that's not a named defendant. And so I point that out and say, look, this person could be the worst person in the world. He's not named. He doesn't get to have the structural protections that a named defendant has with getting served everything and getting their day in court and all this stuff. And he hasn't been charged with any of the stuff you just said. And that, to me, I look at it and say, oh, God, if you're going to name people in your lawsuit, you have the problem that they're named. They aren't a defendant right now. And then you have reporting, which is that I don't blame reporters for this, but they mention him as named in the lawsuit a bunch, which I think you and I probably read the same way in code as that means you're a party to the lawsuit when you use that phraseology. You have to be super careful about named in literally. Yes, he's not a party. And look, obviously the Cosby suite photos, some of the stuff Kotaku reported on, I'm not sitting here and defending the person as a person. I'm sitting here and defending the process and saying, the state's playing dirty pool with some of that stuff. Yeah. And then you get food crawls, which are just really, really vague. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just really, really a vague allegation.
Right. And let's go back first for a second to the suicide subject. Yeah. And because somebody, S. Chapman, he commented here, hearsay. And that was one of the first thoughts that I had when I read that one sentence where they were like, oh yeah, this one person said that that, they thought that it was because there was a photo.
Unemployee, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, getting that evidence in at trial is probably going to be a little bit difficult because there is a rule against hearsay. I mean, and the definition of hearsay is a statement that proves the truth of the matter asserted. So, in other words, it's, something happened because so-and-so said it happened. That's the kind of statement that you usually can't get in. There are some exceptions and whatnot.
They're leaning on the existence of the sexual relationship, which presumably they can show based on the circumstances as they put them as evidence of harassment. When I think we know there's nuance there. I wouldn't recommend a subordinate supervisor relationship, but it's not definitively harassment on its own.
Right.
And so that they're skipping that step and saying we can show this relationship, that we could show the suicide, we can put them together. And it's like, I'm not saying you can't, California, because I don't know what you got, but it strikes me as hard.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, even in California, which is very employee friendly. I mean, when it comes to a harassment claim, you still have to show that there was that there was, the environment around this person was enough so that so that they are actually being harassed by this person or by this group of people on an improper basis.
Yeah.
And so it can't just be, one passing comment. That's not, generally speaking, that's not going to be enough. And having a relationship with your supervisor on its own also probably not enough. You need more. And that's probably why they included that passing comment. But even that one does have a little bit of I mean, it has a lot of weakness to it as well.
Yeah, so, I think all of that there, like I said, it's unclear. If you look at the whole procedural standpoint here, it's like California gets a complaint sometime in 2018. They investigate him for a while. Activision's working with them, submitting data, doing the things that you do when you're under investigation by an agency. At some point, California turns on them. Seems like in the last couple of months. They do what Activision claims is a perfunctory mandatory mediation for the first, I think it's 8 days of July or something along those lines, which is notably over the holiday, and it's not a lot of meetings. And it's like, I'm not sure whether or not that California was doing good faith mediation. I still think that if Activision can show that it wasn't, the most likely initial occurrence is that the court just orders mandatory mediation again. For a short period of time. But you've got all those procedures. And then, I think in one of my videos, I said, if you're just inclined to read this generously towards Activision Blizzard, the one thing you could say is, gee whiz, I don't know, 3-year investigation with the full power of the state of California, DFEH. It's not a ton of allegations on the stuff that's really important. Now, obviously, some of that changes with the stuff on the internet, and California knows what it's doing with some of that stuff. They flooded the zone with the stuff on Twitter and social media, and some of those people might report to the department from now on. And Activision Blizzard made their job a lot easier with the responses.
Yes, yeah, and on that note, let's go through some of the responses. I don't have them actually. I should have had them handy here in my Chrome tab. But I mean, like the very first response, right. was primarily a defensive move, right?
Well, I mean, I think when I covered it in my video, I put up the flag of the People's Republic of California.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because Activision comes out in full cable politics mode. They say it's malicious and ridiculous and everything else, and not stuff that's too terrible. And then in the middle, they just start going off on California's unelected bureaucrats acting angrily towards businesses, and this is why everybody's leaving the state and all this stuff. It's like, oh, I mean, that's a direction. And that happened. I mean, I think what's worth noting, as you said earlier in this stream, is that happens almost immediately. That's indicative of a number of things. One is the emotionality is indicative of not being vetted. The time, vetting takes a little bit of time. And your crisis managers are going to say, the same thing that your personal crisis manager will say. Put the email in the drawer and then look at it again and look and see if you sound crazy.
Yeah. Maybe have someone that's a few steps away take a look at it. Slow your roll.
It sounded for all the world like the executive suite just sent it out themselves. And they were pissed about it. And the things that they alleged are that the mediation wasn't done in compliance with the statute, which would have an implied good faith and fair dealing kind of component to it. And some people said that means that we know Activision's lying because the state says they had these mediation meetings. I said, well, agencies can follow their statutes, or they can show up and say $1 billion.
Yes.
No? Okay. We'll have 3 more meetings where I'll say the same thing, and then we'll go to court. Yeah, you can abide by the statute, or you don't abide by the statute. This isn't limited to California, by the way. Some people think it's like, oh no, California's the worst. It's like, states. Agencies can be agencies.
It's not limited to the government either. I mean, no. I've been in those mediations too, where you're like, well, I mean, we came with thinking that there was a possibility that we were gonna maybe resolve this, but what's the other side doing? Like they're just sitting around having lunch, with the mediator.
Well, and if it's a statute that's mandating a mediation, where if you're sitting if you're in the DFEH and you think you're righteous on this, and then you say, well, this is a mandate that we have to do, but we're not doing it out of our desire to mediate this thing. We want to take them down. And I mean, one thing that's notable, I think we skipped it, is that very first paragraph doesn't talk about Activision Blizzard at all. The very first thing they say in their complaint is a 1-paragraph long screed about the video game industry, like as a whole. And it's like, well, that's an editorial. They footnote to like 6 separate Gamergate articles. They talk about, in general, how the video game industry is a bastion of bad will and all this stuff. And it's like, well, okay. Well, we know where you stand. I don't know whether that makes it easier or harder for your case, because I would get in there and be like, well, so you came into this investigation knowing what you were going to do, all that kind of stuff. But they are very clearly representing that they have a problem with gaming industry, and certainly with some of the stories they just went out and stalled the riot settlement last year. So I mean, there's some legitimacy to they're seeing problems in this specific industry that they want to address. Yeah. And by the time you get to Activision responding, they want to say they didn't follow mediation. They were deliberately not telling us what we did. So that mediation requirement in California is essentially the legislature prioritizing fixing it without court if they can. Yeah. And so presumably, if you're trying to fix it without court if you can, you have to tell them what you think should be fixed. Right. That can include fines. They can include apologies. They can include whatever you want in a mediation. Settlement. I think some people think settlement's just money, because I get a lot of that comments as well, which is like, oh, they would just pay money to put it on the table. It's like, well, first of all, I think a California settlement with the DFEH has to be public. But outside of that, you can ask for whatever you want. You want to ask for the managers to be different. You want to ask for the board to be completely reconstituted. You can ask for whatever as part of that process. And it sounds to me like Activision believes that California didn't even tell them what they wanted changed, which if that's the case, I think you do get an order of mandatory mediation. The court says, well, try again.
Which even if they did fulfill that administrative requirement, the judge may very well send them to mediation anyway, because courts are so backlogged when it comes to any sort of civil litigation. So courts are routinely trying to push cases to some sort of
resolution,
ADR. Exactly. So that could also be the case anyways, that the court, the judge in this case may say, okay, well, you guys just went to mediation. How far did you guys get? Okay, well, maybe I'll try sending you there first to see, maybe you'll get a little bit further this time, and then you don't have to bother me, and I can get to the other 50,000 cases that are on my docket.
Yeah, absolutely. And the state of California is like, no, that's totally fine with us now, because we were able to make this public, and you're in a much worse position. So let's talk now, Activision Blizzard. I'm not saying California strategically has played this wrongly. I think they likely were interacting with Activision Blizzard in a capacity during their data exchanges where they knew they were likely to do something like what they just did the last week. So I think, people want to say things about California and the strategy, and I can talk about some of the weaknesses. A certain portion of me wants to say they played Activision like a fiddle, and they knew that they would burn in this particular way.
Yeah, that could very well be. Especially if you've been following anything having to do with Activision Blizzard in the last several years. That's really when I started paying attention, was in the last couple of years. And Jason Schreier has had plenty of articles, on the subject, talking about how employees are revolting by posting their publishing their
They did
salaries
that.
in a
That was last year,
spreadsheet.
right?
And
Yeah.
So all kinds of stuff like that. Well, let me get this super chat here. Wow, that's probably the biggest super chat I've ever gotten. Thank you, Classic
Hey,
Mike Cade. Awesome. Yeah. I hope that this does not get settled out of court. Activision needs to be held accountable for what they have done. So, I mean, well, yeah, sometimes it depends on what the settlement actually is, because, you know, as Rick just said, sometimes it's not just money that gets exchanged. I mean, I've also had clients that were, you know, in these types of cases that were like, what I really want from my former employers, I want an apology. I want an apology for, you know, them secretly recording a conversation where they fired me for making a complaint, you know, about sexual harassment, you know, like, and unfortunately, usually those kinds of things don't happen, and they end up with a financial settlement. But it's possible. There's all kinds of you know, injunctive type of relief that you can also get through a settlement as well.
Oh yeah, the parties can agree on whatever. No doubt there. Oh look, you got a bidding war.
There we go. Here we go. Thank you, Kurt at Uncivil Law. $50 bigger super chat.
Chatters here today.
I know.
Awesome.
This is like the best week for my channel right now. Oh man. But yeah, so that'll be really, really interesting to see, you know, if it settles, if it gets, you know, any further in you know, in litigation before that point. But
so I think, to me, and you know this as well as I do, almost everything settles. And the reason for that is not just the cost of litigation and the lawyers, but you talked about discovery. You know, it took Kotaku 4 days to find a Facebook group called the Cause Committee or whatever.
Yikes.
And this was yesterday's video at Virtual Legality. Even if I can construct a series of events, which I did, which is like, well, they didn't know about Crosby, and some of these things are plausible. 2013 is before the 2014 reveals, all this stuff. That doesn't change one bit of that photo in 2021 and those headlines. And that's not going to be the end of that stuff at all. If Activision discovery on this would be comp questions, would be executive meetings, would be virtually everything in their company, there is no doubt in my mind they don't want discovery on this. How much they don't want it depends on a lot of things. And one of those things that it depends on is what the state of California ultimately winds up asking for. Because Activision knows, I think, that it has the better part of the argument for the broad discrimination claim. It would surprise me if they didn't. By baking them together, they force them into we really need to settle this thing, but we can't settle it for, you think we owe employees $1 billion. And we don't know what that number would be, but we do know that the state of California said that Riot shouldn't be allowed to settle for less than $400 million. And Riot's not Activision Blizzard. Mm-hmm. So it's what is California asking for in that room is a part of this story as well.
Yes, that is very true too. So here's another super chat. Thank you so much, Provolone Loaf. Super chat party. Appreciate your content. Well, I appreciate all of you guys watching and commenting and liking and sharing and all that great stuff. So, but yeah, this has been a really great conversation so far. But I guess, you know, and we haven't even touched on all of the statements that were made by various executives. Yeah, Fran, the one that seems to be the one that's drawn the most ire. And the irony, of course, is that she's like the one female executive that's been involved in this, and she's the corporate sponsor, you know, or the executive sponsor.
She's the head of their women's group, I think she said. Yeah, I mean, it's clear, you know, if you want to be cynical, and I don't blame anybody for being cynical on this kind of stuff. It's like that message comes out and it's like, yeah, she was trotted out there because of that, and you can kind of feel that. It's like you're not in a great position to say these things 4 months in. Yeah. You know, so it's in COVID land, right? I don't even know how much you've been in the office in the last, if you were hired in March. So it's like, you're not in a great position. You can see kind of the machinations behind the scenes. It's like, oh, okay, so you found the highest level woman you could get to say this kind of thing in the email. It's a lighter version of the initial statement. And the biggest problem you have with that messaging, and again, we talk about like kind of crisis communications, is the Fran message is designed. It's not wrong necessarily as a strategy. It's designed for the company is with you. that you're being attacked from the outside. It's a circling the wagons email. There's a lot of, these are malicious lies designed to bring us down. We know we're good. We know we're righteous. That's fine as long as your team is with you. And the problem you have is, even at that point in time, you'd already had kind of stuff to start to show that certain employees were thinking that, hey, HR wasn't perfect. The company wasn't perfect. And the problem you have with this set of circumstances, that's going to be true at every company. You should know when you're doing your public relations that somebody somewhere had a bad experience with HR. It's just going to happen. Yeah. And so when you go out with your statements and effectively sound like you're saying we're perfect, and all of this is lies, even when I agree that you should be defending yourself from some of the overreach that California does, what you get is you get the employee groups kind of saying, well, I know that I had a bad experience. I don't think they did anything about this. I had a legitimate concern. I know my friend had a legitimate concern, and they start talking. So, I believe those two people, and they had legitimate concerns. And then you get into this. You get into this controversial with us or against us kind of mode with those kind of statements. Yeah. And it spirals. So Fran happens, then the stuff on the internet happens, then the open letter happens, then the open letter gets reported on the big media sites, then the big media sites crush the stock price. Bobby descends from whatever moon rocket he's on or yacht he's in to give his statement, which was great. His statement was vetted and properly aimed. Yeah. But it's too little too late. Yeah. And it's just such a bad way of handling everything when you're trying essentially 6 different strategies at once. So I did that, I did that video, but I said, you've got the strategy where, okay, California's communist and trying to bring capitalism down. Okay, that didn't work. Then you go with, I feel your pain and we have empathy for all this stuff. But it sounds like you might be admitting that they're true, and people aren't lawyers. They aren't reading it for that level, and I don't blame them. Right. And then with the very next thing after the 2, I feel your pain and your allegations are they're causing me sadness. Fran comes in with, it's all lies and we're going to take them down. Yeah. Like, you can't even, it's like, no, that's not how messaging works. You can't shotgun it.
And something, yes, yeah, exactly. Because then you have, so many different directions that you're going in, and it's not necessarily a good thing. No. But the thing that really struck me about Fran Townsend's statement to all of the other employees is like, yes, we are being attacked from the outside. Meanwhile, I don't know how much she knew about Activision Blizzard before she started working there 4 months ago, because, I mean, if she did, she would understand that there already has been this tension about employees versus C-suite executives.
Well, they had the layoffs a couple of years ago. They had the Blitzchung. I don't know if it was a full formal walkout, but they were covering up the plaques with Every Voice Matters, except, especially China. They were doing all those kinds of, there's friction across a whole lot of things at Activision.
Yeah. And it seems like it's just been increasing. Yes. It's been, increasing over time. And, and it just, to me, when I read it, I was like, this indicates a really big disconnect between the I like to say the mailroom and the C-suite, right? Like there's just like the two experiences are completely different. And there's a lack of communication, probably because of the size of the company. That would at least that could be
that's important to reference as part of all this as well. Yeah. Which is when you're evaluating, are they systemically discriminating? You present 3 stories out of a 10,000 person firm. You don't give us the timeline. We now know that the Cosby Suite story is from at least 8 years ago. And you say, well, what did you present to us in terms of timing? Those are all defenses that Activision can have, because the one thing, and I think a number of companies have actually come out and said this properly, is that the law doesn't demand, nor can we expect, perfection. You can hire somebody, they can be a saint for 24 years and then do something real bad. Yeah. And the law says, what do you do about it? And what prevention mechanisms did you have to make sure that didn't happen? And why did they fail? And how do you fix it? It's not you can prevent everything bad from happening ever. That's not what's required from a company. And so that's part of the story, which is, okay, cube crawls in and of themselves. I'm a lawyer. I don't recommend drinking on your premises. I don't recommend parties and these things because I'm risk averse. But you can say, well, the morale benefit's high enough. Our people are good people. They're adults. I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. Plenty of companies have alcohol and alcohol-fueled parties on their premises. Yeah. And they can cross lines. You're hoping that they don't. That's the exposure risk. That's why you take it into your general counsel's office and they say no, and you do it behind their back or whatever. But that happens in a lot of places. And the question is, Did it cross lines? Did it rampantly and repeatedly cross lines? Should you have reason to know about it? And why did you not do anything? And so that really needs numerosity and showings of these kinds of things that aren't existent in the complaint. Doesn't mean they don't have them. Doesn't mean they can't gain them now with everybody talking about it.
Right.
But that's part of it as well. So 10,000 people is hard to manage. It's multiple companies.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I completely agree. And that's why you can end up having some serious issues, but it comes down to how organized are they in their, employee handling, employee relations.
Yes.
How quickly do they respond to things? How what is the communication like in these places? And one thing that I noticed in my experience with litigating these kinds of cases is that, the companies that tended to have, or at least the companies that I saw, through these cases, are ones where I started to see a pattern of companies that were maybe a little bit disorganized or, particularly stressful, or, and so there was just like employees, generally speaking, were unhappy. And so these kinds of discrimination and harassment kind of issues just sort of started to fester, probably out of this overall stressful environment. And I know that that's kind of an issue in a lot of these, video game publishing companies, developers, and all kinds of stuff. There's crunch culture. There's all kinds of issues.
Hard. There's no question there.
Yeah. So I would not be surprised if that was some sort of a factor here as well.
Well, by the time you get to the statements and everything else, I absolutely think that's a factor, because you're getting to a place where I like to think of it as a no confidence vote when you think about governing bodies. I've often had people ask me the question, what does that mean? We talk about it with universities. Okay, so you have no confidence. It doesn't change anything. Nobody's fired. It's a signal. You get that letter out there. When it crosses 2,000 signatories, current signatories, because there was some alighting of current and former while it was happening, you get to those numbers. You've got such a significant problem of hearts and minds that it doesn't matter whether you think Bobby Kotick's statement is better. It is. Or whether the next statement is better or anything else. Once you've come to the table now with a pose, which I think is right from the management missteps that they had responding to the lawsuit. Once you come to the pose of, I have no confidence in what you say and that you're not trying to backstab me, nothing will work. You're in a real crisis at an institutional level. The reason the stock price dives is not because of the lawsuit. It doesn't dive when the lawsuit's filed. It dives when leadership looks like nobody is running the boat and the employees are revolting. And you have to make Call of Duty. You have to make widgets. And now the investor class looks at it and says, I don't know. Bobby kind of comes in and assuages fears a little bit from the investor group, but they have no reason to believe anything that you say now. They work those jobs that are hard. They have crunch. They have HR relationships that aren't necessarily great, which is, I think, most companies with HR. I say that in one of my videos. But regardless, you now are in a situation where you actually don't have an easy answer to anything. You come up to me and say, what would you do, Rick? I say, at this point in time, I don't know. You're writing it out. You're trying to still do your best, but you've screwed it up so significantly. You're looking to see whether California wants to settle, how you can start to right the ship.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a total crisis, and that's why it's kind of unfortunate for Activision Blizzard, and a lot of people probably don't have a lot of feelings of empathy towards Activision Blizzard.
There's a lot of innocent people that are there. I mean,
absolutely, of course. I mean, the employees that are working there, right? I mean, not necessarily the ones that are harassing other people, possibly. Assuming those allegations are true, but. I mean, I just it's unfortunate, because especially when you see the statement by Bobby Kotick, it's like if those other ones hadn't existed before him, then that would have been a proper response, because it did balance quite well the the need for empathy for the allegations, because it's like, if there are
it opens with a lot of empathy.
Here, yes, and
you don't have to believe Bobby, but it opens properly.
Of course. Yeah. But at the same time, then he's talking about how, we're going to continue to work on things and continue to make things better. Obviously, as I think you mentioned in one of your videos that it's it's indicating that he's very subtly saying, we've been doing things to improve things here.
As soon as I saw that, I said, I see what you did there. Sure.
Yes. Yeah.
No, we'll keep doing it. We'll keep doing it. Even better, though. Even better. Also, we'll hire our own law firm to audit our practices. Should be good.
Yes, that's another one. Well, thank you, Dustin Sipes, for purchasing the super sticker.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, this is great. We're doing great on super chats. I need to have you
just
on more often.
To do some super chats. It's great.
So, but yeah, I think. Yeah, and that was another thing, and you pointed out in his statement that he was talking about how he's like, yes, and we're hiring Wilmer Hale, and this particular attorney, she did some great work with the SEC, and I remember when you pointed that out that you were like, well, that's kind of weird because that has nothing to do with employment, right? And then and then of course, lo and behold, in the next video, you're like, well, it turns out that's because she's doing all that. Yeah, exactly. They're doing all the SEC work for them, so that's why he mentioned it. So.
What can you do?
Yeah. So, it's there obviously are ways that they can continue to improve on their messaging, even with that Bobby Kotick statement. But I mean, it seems to me that I mean, this is just me talking with my experiences as a plaintiff's attorney. I always heard the story from the employee side, when they were like, I really I wouldn't have wanted to sue if I had just gotten an apology, like that kind of thing. But, it seems to me that, and tell me if you see it differently, but it seems like, probably one of the best ways that they could have responded to this is to say, we're looking into all of these allegations very seriously because they are very serious and they need to be vetted. And if there is any truth to any of these allegations, we are going to put full force into rectifying them. And if they are not, then we are going to fight tooth and nail against them as we are entitled to do so.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a number of different tones you could strike that wouldn't be as horrible as what they did. The one kind of framework that I've put forth, I think, in a couple of my videos is I would have had the message be essentially, these are very important. This is important issues. The state of California is rightly concerned about its citizenry and about how its people are treated, just as Activision Blizzard is interested in those things. We think the state of California has mistargeted us. We believe strongly in equality and in a safe environment for our female employees. And we look forward to showing the state of California as we continue in this process that we have done that, we believe in it, and we will continue to do that.
Yes.
And that the state of California should absolutely protect its citizenry, but focus on the people that are the real problems. Something that just says, this is all serious, this is all important, they are mistargeting us, and we're going to show them that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that seems like that would strike a pretty good balance, but well, I think we've gone a little bit past an hour.
Awesome.
I don't know if there's anything else that you want to talk about, but if not,
no, it's one of those things where I think Activision Blizzard should have a response document soonish that we'll go over, a legal one. The funny thing about when we talk about Activision responses, we're not talking about anything from the legal process side.
Right.
And so that they should have a formal response that I will undoubtedly go over. And I suspect we'll go pretty dark on this story for a while.
Okay.
Channel or otherwise. You never know. People could say whatever. There could be another walkout. But I suspect that it'll go dark for a good long time.
Yeah.
So we'll follow it. We'll see what happens there. Otherwise, no, I think this story shows the importance of messaging, shows how you can make a bad situation worse.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's one of those things where I think a lot of people are interested. I think a lot of people are getting information, and I think that's good. But it's the one thing I say about virtual legality is I do like to try to do lighter stuff from time to time because, this stuff is super serious, and it's. I would have preferred not to have a world where a publisher that I have liked historically, where I do have family working there, had 4 or 5 episodes in a row about how they screwed up. And of course, the underlying complaints, which are significant. And certainly if systematic problems can be shown, are a really bad deal for the gaming industry as a global publisher and for the people involved, obviously.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, it's especially because this is my, the whole reason why I got into covering some of these topics having to do with the intersection of law and gaming is because of my husband. You know, he's a really big gamer, and so he's got all kinds of games that he loves playing, and I've really kind of fallen in love with a lot of these games sort of through him by being his backseat gamer, right? Telling him what to do and whatnot. And you know, and actually now we're starting to play a little bit together too. We're playing. I mentioned this in a live stream yesterday, but we're starting to play It Takes Two.
I was actually when you said that, I said full recommendation for It Takes Two. That's going on my end of the year list.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like, you know, the whole premise is there's this couple that's getting divorced, and so they have to learn how to communicate. And it's
sometime we can have an episode where we could talk about. I'm not positive the premise matches the game so well, but it's fine.
I mean, in my experience, not that divorce has ever come up between, you know, me and my husband, but it's like the communication aspect and the frustration of like he's like, you need to jump
in there.
Just jump, just do it, you know. And it's just like, and I'm like, I'm trying, I don't know. And his skills just way outpaced mine. But yeah. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate when the people that make these games that you love are doing the things that you don't want them to be doing. It makes it pretty painful.
Yeah, either direction. We're suffering under the people that are doing that. It's, right. You know, it's an industry and a hobby that's brought me a great amount of joy, and you hate to see any of this.
Yeah,
and so that's where it comes
from. And then, are you planning on covering the? I
can pitch my about an hour after this ends. Since I wasn't able to hit the upload button, or more specifically, I didn't want to hit the upload button while I was going to be uploading a stream. That video is set, and that'll be going through the various processes. That'll be about an hour. And I got a Black Widow versus Disney video that'll be up this afternoon.
Nice. Once again, just super quick, very prolific. I love it. I've got to really learn from you on how to get super fast on that kind of stuff.
This is because I see those stories. I say, there's more there. I want to read the complaint. Then I read the complaint. I said, I should do a video. And then there's a video. It's just every day.
Yeah. So good. I mean, I plan on doing a video on it too. But it'll probably be early next week because I like to do a lot of editing and graphics and all that kind of stuff on it too. So just sort of help with visual aids.
That's true. That's what I said when I first came on your show, or you came on mine. Is that you have the YouTube style down much better than I do. I have a PowerPoint style.
Yeah,
but that's what I can handle.
I mean, either one is effective, right? So we do what works.
That's right. Got to find your own way.
But great. So if you guys want to see more of Rick Hoeg, check out Hoeg Law on YouTube. You can find him on Twitter. You can get his Patreon. I've linked to all of that in the description below already. You can also buy his merch. You've got merch. That's awesome. I love it.
I'm wearing
some of it.
I only appear on these things in merch. So we got virtual legality stuff. This is the definitions one that I tend to wear on podcasts. Nice. And then we have some Reasonable Minds Can Differ stuff, which I think is our best selling stuff.
Nice.
People like Reasonable Minds Can Differ.
It's true. Reasonable minds can differ, of course. And you say quite a bit on your channel. It's good.
I have these ticks that are all going to be shirts one day.
But that's the way to do it, right? So okay, well, cool. So then on that note, just be sure to like the video, share it, comment on it, all the great YouTubey stuff. And oh my gosh, one last super chat. What hurts companies more, money or power? Ooh.
Yes.
The answer is yes. Yeah, I mean, money is power, right? Power is money, depending on how you look at it, right?
It's one of those things. I do entrepreneurial law, right? So I have small companies, and there's certainly a way where I think I mentioned it as part of this stream. Video game companies are odd because they're still so young that they're founder-led for the most part. And when you go from one guy to four guys to 20 to 700 to 9,000, you have different things to deal with in terms of management and others. And some people often can't make that transition. And I think some of that's what we're seeing in video gaming, which is that they didn't really have to go through financing events or venture capital or institutional banks or whatever in the 70s and 80s and 90s and getting through to all that. So they don't have necessarily the same institutional structures that you see in the car companies here in Detroit or others that have been around longer. And so they're going through a bit of a coming of age in a way that hopefully leads to a better game industry in the long run.
Yeah. Hope so. Okay, well, on that note, we will see you guys in our next videos on both of our channels.
Thanks for checking it out.
All right. See ya.